The apartment door clicked shut behind me, and suddenly Catherine Ross was standing in the narrow hallway, her arms crossed, blocking my path to the stairs. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and those green eyes that had been haunting my thoughts for months were fixed on mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "You're not leaving until we talk," she said, her voice steady but carrying something underneath that I couldn't quite name. Fear? Determination? Hope? I stopped walking, my keys still jingling in my hand from the momentum. The hallway felt impossibly small with both of us in it, the overhead light casting everything in that harsh fluorescent glow that made even the most mundane moments feel dramatic. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that reminded me of spring mornings. "Catherine, I don't think this is a good idea," I managed to say, though my voice came out rougher than I intended. The weight of the past 6 months pressed down on us both, all those stolen glances and careful conversations and moments when we'd almost said something that mattered. She took a step closer, and I noticed the way her hands trembled slightly before she pressed them against her sides. "I've been thinking about what you said last week, about taking chances, about not living in fear of what might happen." The memory hit me like a physical thing. We'd been in the kitchen at 2 a.m, both of us unable to sleep, sharing tea and talking about everything except what we really wanted to talk about. I'd been rambling about my job, about how I'd been playing it safe for too long, how maybe it was time to take some risks. I hadn't been talking about work at all, and we both knew it. "I remember," I said quietly. "Good," she said, and there was something fierce in her voice now. "Because I'm done being afraid. Hello, my name is Henry Kim. I'm 31 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means I spend most of my days hunched over my laptop in coffee shops, trying to make other people's visions come to life while my own dreams collect dust in the corner of my cluttered apartment. I live in a converted Victorian house in Portland, Oregon, split into 4 units, where the walls are thin enough that I know my neighbor Kenneth Stewart has been practicing guitar at 11 p.m. every night for the past 3 months, and where the landlord, Frank Lewis, still hasn't fixed the creaky third step that announces everyone's arrival and departure. But none of that matters as much as the fact that Catherine Ross lives here too, in the unit directly below mine, and that she's been the center of my thoughts for longer than I care to admit. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you were watching from and hype this video in the comments. Sometimes the most ordinary moments turn into the ones that change everything, and I have a feeling you'll understand what I mean by the time this story's over. 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life looked like. I had my routine, my clients, my carefully constructed world where I controlled the variables and minimized the risks. I'd been living in the apartment for 2 years, nodding politely to my neighbors but keeping to myself. The way you do when you've been hurt before and decided that distance is safer than connection. Then Catherine moved in downstairs with her brother Kenneth, and everything shifted without me even realizing it was happening. The first time I really noticed her, she was struggling with a massive canvas up the front steps, cursing under her breath in a way that made me smile despite myself. I was coming home from a client meeting, still wearing the button-down shirt and khakis that made me feel like I was playing dress-up, and there she was in paint-splattered jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair escaping from a messy bun, looking more real and alive than anyone I'd seen in months. "Need help with that?" I called out, already jogging down the steps toward her. She looked up, and I got my first full look at those green eyes, bright with frustration and something else I couldn't identify. "Only if you don't mind getting paint on your fancy clothes," she said, and there was a teasing note in her voice that made my stomach flip. "They're not that fancy," I said, which was true. The shirt was from Target, and the khakis had a small stain on the knee from where I'd spilled coffee that morning. But something about the way she said it made me feel like maybe I'd been trying too hard to be someone I wasn't. We maneuvered the canvas through the narrow doorway together, our hands brushing as we adjusted our grip, and I caught a glimpse of the painting. It was abstract, all swirling blues and greens with touches of gold that seemed to move in the changing light. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, the kind of art that spoke to something deep inside that I'd forgotten was there. "This is incredible," I said, and I meant it. She paused in the doorway, looking back at the painting with a critical eye. "It's not finished yet. I'm not sure it ever will be." Maybe that's the point, I said without thinking, and she turned to look at me with surprise. What do you mean? I felt heat creep up my neck, suddenly aware that I was talking to a woman I'd just met about art and philosophy while standing in a cramped hallway. I don't know, maybe some things are meant to keep evolving, you know? Maybe finished is overrated. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. I'm Catherine, she said. Henry, I replied. And when she smiled again, I knew I was in trouble. That was the beginning, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a pattern of casual encounters that felt anything but casual. I'd run into her checking the mail, and we'd end up talking for 20 minutes about everything and nothing. She'd knock on my door to ask if I had a screwdriver, and somehow we'd wind up sharing coffee and discussing the books scattered across my coffee table. I learned that she was an artist, trying to make a living painting murals and selling pieces at local galleries. That she'd moved to Portland from a small town in Ohio where everyone expected her to follow the same path as her mother and grandmother, where being different was seen as a character flaw rather than a gift. That she'd left behind a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. What about you? She asked one evening when we'd somehow ended up sitting on the front steps, watching the neighborhood cats navigate their territorial disputes. What brought you to graphic design? It was a simple question, but it hit something tender inside me. I wanted to be a fine artist, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Painting, sculpture, all of it. But my parents thought it was impractical, and after a while I started to believe them. Graphic design felt like a compromise. Still creative, but with a steady paycheck. Do you miss it? The fine art? I looked at her, sitting there with paint still under her fingernails, and that direct way of looking at the world that I envied. Every day, I said. She nodded like she understood completely. It's never too late, you know, to go back to what you love. Easy for you to say. You had the courage to actually do it. Courage? She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. I was terrified, still am most days, but I figured being scared while doing what I loved was better than being scared while doing something I hated. That conversation stayed with me for days afterward. I found myself looking at my work differently, wondering when I'd stopped seeing it as a stepping stone and started seeing it as a cage. I started sketching again in my spare time. Just little things, but it felt like waking up a part of myself that had been sleeping. Kenneth was harder to read than his sister. He was 25, a musician who worked construction during the day and played gigs at night. All sharp angles and restless energy. He was polite enough when we crossed paths, but there was something guarded about him, like he was protecting something precious. It wasn't until I heard him and Catherine arguing one night through the thin walls that I understood what that something was. You're getting too attached, his voice carried clearly through the floor. To this place, to that guy upstairs. What happens when you get your heart broken again? Henry's not like that. Catherine's voice was muffled, but I could hear the frustration in it. That's what you said about David, too. There was silence after that, long enough that I wondered if they'd moved to another room. Then Catherine spoke again, so quietly I had to strain to hear. I know you're trying to protect me, Kenny, but I can't live my whole life being afraid of getting hurt. I just don't want to watch you fall apart again. I pressed my ear closer to the floor, guilt and curiosity warring in my chest. Who was David? What had happened that made Kenneth so protective, so suspicious of anyone who got close to his sister? The next morning, Catherine seemed different, more distant, like she'd pulled back into herself. When I ran into her at the mailboxes, her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. Everything okay? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Fine, she said, but her voice was flat, just tired. I wanted to push, to ask what was wrong, but something in her posture warned me off. So I nodded and watched her walk away, feeling like I'd lost something I'd never actually had. The distance lasted for weeks. She still said hello when we passed each other, still made small talk about the weather or the neighborhood. But the warmth was gone. The easy conversations, the shared laughter, the moments when it felt like we were building something together, all of it disappeared behind a wall of careful politeness. I threw myself into work, taking on more projects than I could reasonably handle, Staying up late hunched over my computer until my eyes burned and my neck ached. But even when I was completely absorbed in designing logos and website layouts, part of my mind was always listening for the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, the soft murmur of her voice through the walls. It was during one of those late nights that I heard the crying. At first, I thought it might be the television or music from another apartment. But as I sat there in the dark glow of my laptop screen, I realized it was coming from directly below me. Soft, muffled sobs that seemed to go on forever. I stood up from my desk, pacing to the window and back, unsure what to do. Every instinct told me to go downstairs, to knock on her door, to offer whatever comfort I could. But the memory of her careful distance held me back. She'd made it clear that she didn't want my involvement in whatever she was going through. The crying stopped eventually, but I couldn't get back to work. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what had made her so sad, wishing I could do something to help. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "Henry, I'm sorry if I kept you awake last night. I know the walls are thin. I'm dealing with some personal stuff right now, but I didn't mean for it to affect anyone else. Catherine." The formal tone of it broke my heart a little. I sat on my couch holding the piece of paper, reading it over and over, trying to decode what she wasn't saying. The careful handwriting, the way she'd signed her full name instead of just her initial, the distance she was trying to maintain even an apology. I wrote back, keeping my response just as careful. "Catherine, you don't need to apologize. We all go through difficult times. If you ever need anything, even just someone to listen, I'm here. Henry." I slipped it under her door before I could second-guess myself, then spent the rest of the day wondering if I'd overstepped. The response came 2 days later, another note in that same careful handwriting. "Thank you. That means more than you know." It wasn't much, but it felt like a crack in the wall she'd built between us. I held on to that hope, even as the days passed and nothing changed. She was still polite but distant, still careful to keep our interactions brief and surface level. Then one evening in early November, everything shifted again. I was walking up the front steps after a particularly frustrating client meeting, my laptop bag heavy on my shoulder and my mind still churning over the changes they'd requested for the third time that week. The air was crisp with the promise of winter and the streetlights were just beginning to flicker on. Catherine was sitting on the steps, wrapped in a thick cardigan, staring out at the street with that faraway look I'd come to recognize. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and for the first time in weeks, her smile seemed genuine. "Long day?" she asked. "The longest," I said, settling down beside her without being invited. It felt like a risk, but one worth taking. Client who can't make up their mind about what they want, but knows exactly what they don't want after I've already designed it. She laughed, and the sound made something tight in my chest loosen. I know that feeling. I spent 6 hours on a mural sketch yesterday, only to have the client tell me they decided they wanted something more cheerful. Apparently, my interpretation of cheerful and theirs are very different things. What was your interpretation? A forest scene with deep greens and shadows? Some mystery to it. Theirs was, and I quote, "more like a rainbow threw up on a unicorn." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Please tell me you didn't actually paint a rainbow throwing up on a unicorn. I'm seriously considering it just to see their faces. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a neighbor walk their dog past the streetlight. The distance between us felt smaller than it had in weeks, like maybe we were finding our way back to whatever we'd been building before. "Henry," she said suddenly, her voice more serious, "I owe you an explanation about why I've been so distant lately." "You don't owe me anything," I said, though part of me desperately wanted to understand. "I do, though. You've been nothing but kind to me, and I've been treating you like a stranger." She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. "Kenneth told you about David, didn't he? I heard you two talking in the hallway last week." I felt heat creep up my neck. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop. The walls are thin, and I was just coming up the stairs when I heard my name." "It's okay. I figured you'd hear eventually anyway." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. "David was my ex-fiancé. We were together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. I thought we were building a life together, you know, making plans, talking about the future. The pain in her voice was raw, immediate, like the wound was still fresh. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand or offer some gesture of comfort, but I kept my hands folded in my lap. What happened? I found out he was cheating, had been for months apparently, with his coworker, his ex-girlfriend, probably others I never found out about. Her laugh was bitter. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was realizing that while I was planning our wedding, he was planning his exit strategy. He'd already been looking at apartments, already been telling people that he wasn't sure about us. Catherine, I'm so sorry. The thing is, everyone saw it coming except me. My friends, my family, even Kenneth tried to warn me. But I was so invested in the idea of us, in the future I thought we were building, that I ignored all the signs. I made excuses for him, rationalized his behavior, convinced myself that love was supposed to be hard work. She turned to look at me then, and I saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. When I moved here, I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistake again. I wouldn't let myself get attached to someone who might just be passing through. I wouldn't invest in something that might not be real. The implication hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. She was talking about David, but she was also talking about us, about whatever this thing was that had been growing between us before she'd pulled away. Is that what you think this is? I asked quietly. Me just passing through? I don't know, she said, and her honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. I don't know what this is, Henry. I don't know what you want from me or what I want from you. All I know is that every time I see you, every time we talk, I feel myself caring more than I should. And that terrifies me. I was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the right words. The street was getting darker around us, the November air growing colder, but neither of us moved to go inside. What if I told you that I'm terrified too, I said finally. What if I told you that I've been thinking about you every day for months, and that scares the hell out of me because I've never felt like this about anyone before? She looked at me with surprise, like she hadn't expected that level of honesty. What if I told you that I've been playing it safe my whole life, choosing the practical option over the thing I actually wanted? And that meeting you made me realize how much I've been missing, I continued, the words coming faster now. What if I told you that I don't know what this is either, but I know I don't want to run away from it just because it might hurt? Henry, I'm not David, I said, and there was more force in my voice than I'd intended. I'm not looking for an exit strategy. I'm not planning to hurt you or use you or disappear when things get complicated. I'm just a guy who's been alone for too long, who met an incredible woman and started hoping for things I didn't even know I wanted. She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks in the dim light from the street lamp. How do I know that? How do I trust that when I've been so wrong before? You don't, I said simply. You can't know for sure. Neither can I. That's what makes it scary, and that's what makes it worth it. We sat there in the growing darkness, the weight of everything we just said settling between us like a bridge we weren't sure we were ready to cross. I could hear the distant sound of traffic, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the steady rhythm of our breathing. I need time, she said finally, to think about all of this, to figure out if I'm brave enough to try again. I understand, I said, though part of me wanted to argue, to push for more certainty, more commitment. But I learned enough about Catherine to know that pushing would only make her retreat further. Take all the time you need. She stood up then, wrapping her cardigan around herself like armor. Thank you for being honest with me, for not making this easy. Making it easy? You could have just said what you thought I wanted to hear. Could have promised me things you might not be able to deliver. Instead, you told me the truth, even the parts that are uncomfortable. She paused at the door, looking back at me. That means something, Henry, more than you probably realize. After she went inside, I sat on the steps for another hour, replaying every word of our conversation, trying to decode what it all meant. The air grew cold enough that I could see my breath, but I wasn't ready to go back to my empty apartment, back to the waiting and wondering that had become my constant companions. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended animation. Catherine and I were polite when we crossed paths, but there was a new awareness between us, like we were both hyper-conscious of every word, every glance, every accidental touch when we reached for the mailbox at the same time. Kenneth's attitude toward me shifted too. Where before he'd been merely polite, now there was something more evaluative in the way he looked at me, like he was trying to decide if I was worthy of his sister's trust. I couldn't blame him for being protective, especially after what Catherine had told me about David, but it added another layer of pressure to an already complicated situation. It was during this tense waiting period that I made a decision that would change everything. I'd been struggling with a logo design for a local nonprofit, something that was supposed to capture their mission of environmental restoration while still being clean and professional enough for grant applications. I'd gone through dozens of iterations, but nothing felt right. The designs were technically competent but soulless, the kind of work that paid the bills but didn't feed anything deeper. On impulse, I closed my laptop and pulled out a sketchbook I hadn't touched in months. Instead of trying to design something that would satisfy a client, I started drawing what I actually saw when I thought about environmental restoration. Not logos or symbols, but real images. The way light filtered through old-growth trees, the delicate curve of new shoots emerging from burned earth, the patient work of hands replanting what had been lost. I lost track of time completely, filling page after page with images that felt more alive than anything I'd created in years. When I finally looked up, it was nearly midnight, and my hand was cramping from holding the pencil, but I felt more energized than I had in months. The next morning, I made another impulsive decision. Instead of translating my sketches into the clean corporate style the client expected, I scanned them as they were and sent them along with a note explaining my vision. It was a risk that could have cost me the contract, but something about my conversation with Catherine had awakened a part of me that was tired of playing it safe. The client loved them. More than that, they wanted to commission a series of illustrations for their annual report, and they asked if I knew any muralists who might be interested in painting something similar on their office wall. I knew exactly who to recommend. I found Catherine in the small courtyard behind our building, working on a canvas propped against the brick wall. The painting was different from the others I'd seen, more representational, but still with that dreamlike quality that made her work so distinctive. She was painting a city scene, but one where nature was slowly reclaiming the urban landscape, vines growing up the sides of buildings, trees pushing through sidewalks, flowers blooming in abandoned lots. "That's beautiful," I said, and she looked up with paint smudged on her cheek and that focused expression she got when she was deep in her work. "Thank you. I've been thinking about what you said, about things that keep evolving instead of being finished. This one feels like it wants to keep growing." "Speaking of growing," I said, pulling out the printed email from the nonprofit, "I have a proposition for you." She read through the email twice, her expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something that might have been excitement. "They want me to paint a mural based on your illustrations. If you're interested, it's not a huge budget, but it's legitimate work, and they seem to really understand what you're trying to do with your art." She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why would you do this? Recommend me for something this perfect?" "Because you're incredibly talented, and they need someone who can bring real vision to the project. Because I believe in your work, even if you don't always believe in it yourself." I paused, trying to find the right words. "And because I want good things to happen for you, Catherine, whether or not anything happens between us." She was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the email again. "This could change things for me. This kind of exposure, working with an organization like this. I know. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not as good as you think I am? Then you'll learn from it and do better next time. But you won't mess it up, Catherine. You're ready for this." She folded the email carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "I need to think about it." "Of course. But don't think too long. They want to move forward pretty quickly." She nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward and hugging me. It was brief, just a quick squeeze, but I could smell her shampoo and feel the warmth of her body against mine, and it took all my willpower not to hold on tighter. "Thank you," she whispered against my shoulder, "for believing in me." 2 days later, she knocked on my door at 8 in the morning, practically vibrating with excitement. "I got the job," she said before I'd even fully opened the door. "I called them yesterday, we had a meeting, and they want me to start next week." "Catherine, that's incredible," I said, and I meant it. The joy on her face was infectious, bright, and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen since before our conversation on the steps. "I couldn't have done this without you. The way you presented the concept, the illustrations you did, it gave me the confidence to really pitch them something ambitious. You could have done this without me, I said. You just needed the right opportunity. She shook her head. It's more than that. You saw something in my work that I couldn't see myself. You took a risk on me when you didn't have to. We stood there in my doorway, grinning at each other like idiots, and I felt something shift between us. The careful distance she'd been maintaining seemed to dissolve, replaced by something warmer and more immediate. I want to cook for you, she said suddenly, to celebrate and to thank you. Are you free tonight? I'm free, I said, probably too quickly. Good, 7 o'clock, my place. She turned to go, then paused and looked back. Henry, I've been thinking about what you said, about being brave enough to try again. My heart started beating faster. And I think I might be ready to find out. She disappeared down the stairs before I could respond, leaving me standing in my doorway with a stupid smile on my face and the sudden realization that I had no idea what to wear to dinner with the woman I'd been falling in love with for months. I spent the day in a state of nervous energy, unable to concentrate on work, changing clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that Catherine had once complimented. I brought a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries for a week, then second-guessed whether that was too presumptuous, then decided that overthinking everything was exactly the kind of behavior that had kept me playing it safe for so long. At exactly 7 o'clock, I knocked on her door. She answered wearing a blue dress that brought out her eyes and her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but more than that, she looked happy. There was a lightness to her that I hadn't seen before, like some weight she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. Perfect timing, she said, stepping aside to let me in. I hope you like pasta. It's about the only thing I can make that doesn't come from a box. Her apartment was smaller than mine, but felt more lived in, more personal. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, some half completed, all of them vibrant with color and life. Books were stacked on every surface, and plants crowded the windowsills, reaching toward the fading daylight. This is amazing, I said, looking around. It's like being inside your imagination. That's either a compliment or a warning about my mental state, she said, laughing. Definitely a compliment. She'd set the small dining table with mismatched plates and cloth napkins, lit candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. It felt intimate and special, like she'd put real thought into making the evening meaningful. Dinner was simple but perfect. Mom made pasta with a masa sauce that tasted like summer, crusty bread, a salad with vegetables from the farmer's market. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily without the careful boundaries that had defined our interactions for so long. Tell me about your illustrations, she said as we finished eating. The ones for the nonprofit. What made you decide to go back to drawing? I felt heat creep up my neck. Honestly, it was something you said, about it never being too late to go back to what you love. I'd been doing the same kind of work for so long that I'd forgotten why I started doing it in the first place. And now? Now I remember. I remember what it feels like to create something that matters to me, not just something that meets a client's specifications. She nodded like she understood completely. That's what the mural means to me. It's the first time someone has hired me to paint something that feels true to who I am as an artist, not just what they think will look good on their wall. What are you going to paint? Her eyes lit up. I want to show the city as a living thing, something that breathes and grows and changes, not just buildings and streets, but the life that exists in the spaces between. The gardens growing on rooftops, the murals on abandoned walls, the way people create beauty even in the most unlikely places. That sounds incredible. I hope so. I'm terrified I'll mess it up, but I'm also more excited about a project than I've been in years. We moved to the couch after dinner, sitting closer together than we had since that night on the steps. The wine had relaxed both of us, made the conversation more honest, more immediate. Can I ask you something? She said, turning to face me. What do you want, Henry? Not just from your work, but from your life. It was a big question, the kind that required real honesty. I want to matter, I said finally. I want to create things that mean something, connect with people who understand what I'm trying to say. I want to stop being afraid of taking risks, of putting myself out there. What else? I looked at her, sitting there in the candlelight with her legs tucked under her, and that direct way of looking at me that made me feel like she could see right through all my defenses. I want to fall in love, I said quietly. Real love, not the careful, conditional kind that comes with escape clauses and backup plans. I want to build something with someone, something that matters enough to fight for. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the couch cushion between us. That's what I thought I had with David. That kind of love. But it wasn't real? I don't think so. I think I was in love with the idea of being in love, with the security of having someone, with the future I thought we were building. But I don't think I really knew him, and I don't think he really knew me. What would real love look like to you? She considered the question seriously, like it was something she'd been thinking about for a long time. Someone who sees me, really sees me, including the parts that aren't pretty or convenient. Someone who challenges me to be better, but loves me even when I'm not. Someone who's building their own life, not just looking for someone to complete them. That sounds like something worth waiting for. It does, she said, and there was something in her voice that made me think we weren't just talking hypothetically anymore. The question is whether I'm brave enough to recognize it when I find it. The air between us felt charged, full of possibility and fear in equal measure. I could see the moment when she made her decision, when something shifted in her expression from uncertainty to resolve. Henry, she said, and her voice was steadier than I'd expected. I've been thinking about what you said, about not running away from something just because it might hurt, about taking chances. And I think I'm tired of being afraid. I think I'm tired of letting David's betrayal define how I approach every relationship. I think I'm ready to try again, with someone who's worth the risk. My heart was beating so hard I was sure she could hear it. Catherine, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm probably going to be scared sometimes, probably going to pull back when things get intense, but I want to try with you if you're willing to be patient with me while I figure out how to trust again. I reached for her hand, threading our fingers together. Her skin was warm, slightly rough from paint and turpentine, real and solid and perfect. I'm willing, I said. I'm willing to be patient, willing to go slow, willing to earn your trust, however long it takes. What if I hurt you? What if I'm too damaged from what happened with David? Then we'll figure it out together. What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not brave enough to be the person you need me to be? Then we'll figure that out too. She smiled then, and it was like watching the sunrise. So we're really doing this, taking the leap. We're doing this, I said, and leaned forward to kiss her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like we were both afraid of moving too fast or wanting too much. But then she kissed me back and with a fierceness that surprised us both, and I understood that this was her way of choosing courage over fear, connection over safety. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too, I whispered back, but I think that's okay. I think being scared means it matters. We spent the rest of the evening talking, planning, dreaming out loud about what we wanted to build together. Not the careful, conditional planning of people who were hedging their bets, but the expansive dreaming of people who had decided to believe in something bigger than their fears. She told me about the places she wanted to travel, the paintings she wanted to create, the life she wanted to build as an artist. I told her about my secret dream of opening a studio where I could do both commercial design and fine art, about the children's book I'd been sketching in private for years, about the way she made me want to be braver than I'd ever been. What happens now? She asked as the evening wound down. Now we take it one day at a time, I said. We keep being honest with each other, keep choosing courage over fear. We see what we can build together. I like the sound of that. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new beginnings. Catherine threw herself into the mural project with an energy and passion that was beautiful to watch. I started taking on more creative projects, turning down the safe, boring work that paid well but left me empty. We spent evenings together, sometimes talking until dawn, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence while she painted and I sketched. Kenneth's attitude toward me shifted gradually from suspicious to grudgingly accepting to something that might have been approval. He started joining our conversations instead of just nodding politely when he passed through the room, and I began to understand the fierce loyalty that made him so protective of his sister. "She's different with you," he told me one evening when Catherine had run to the store. "Lighter, more like herself." "She's pretty amazing," I said. "She is, but she's also been through hell, and if you hurt her, I'll make sure you regret it." "I understand." "Good," he said, and then unexpectedly he smiled. "But I don't think you will. Hurt her, I mean. You're not like him." "David?" "David was all charm and no substance. You're the opposite. All substance. Terrible at charm." I laughed to spite myself. "Thanks. I think it's a compliment. Catherine then needs someone real, someone who sees her for who she actually is instead of who they want her to be, someone who's building their own life instead of looking for someone to fix theirs." It was the most Kenneth had ever said to me at once, and I understood it for what it was. His blessing, his way of saying that he trusted me with his sister's heart. The mural was unveiled on a crisp December morning, and it was everything Catherine had envisioned. And more. The wall came alive under her brush, showing the city as a living, breathing organism where nature and humanity existed in perfect harmony. There were hidden details that revealed themselves the longer you looked. A family of foxes denning under a highway overpass, wildflowers growing through cracks in the sidewalk, children playing in a community garden built on a vacant lot. "It's incredible," I said, standing back to take in the full scope of what she'd created. "It's like you painted hope itself." "I painted what I see when I look at this city," she said. "What I see when I think about what's possible when people decide to care about something bigger than themselves." The nonprofit was thrilled. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Catherine had a waiting list of people who wanted to commission murals. More than that, she had validation that her vision mattered, that her way of seeing the world was something people wanted to experience. "I couldn't have done this without you," she told me that night, as we celebrated with takeout Chinese food and cheap champagne in her apartment. "You absolutely could have. You just needed someone to remind you how talented you are." "It's more than that," she said, setting down her glass and turning to face me. "You didn't just believe in my work. You believed in me. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." "What did I see?" "That I was worth taking a risk on, that I was worth fighting for, worth investing in." David never saw that. He saw someone who would fit into his life, who would make him look good, who would be grateful for his attention. But he never saw me as someone worth building something with. I reached for her hand, still amazed that I was allowed to touch her, that she'd chosen to trust me with this fragile, precious thing we were building together. "You are worth building something with," I said. "You're worth everything, Catherine." She kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "So are you." As winter deepened, we settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, like we'd been designed to fit together. We learned each other's habits, each other's moods, each other's dreams and fears. I learned that she sang off-key in the shower and cried at commercials and stayed up too late reading books that made her think. She learned that I talked to myself when I was concentrating and had strong opinions about coffee and kept a secret stash of candy bars for when deadlines got overwhelming. We had our first real fight in January over something stupid that escalated because we were both tired and stressed. She accused me of being too careful, too afraid to really commit. I accused her of looking for reasons to push me away. We both said things we didn't mean, both retreated to our separate corners to nurse our wounds and our pride. The silence lasted 2 days, 2 of the longest days of my life. I kept starting to text her, then deleting the message. I kept hearing her footsteps on the stairs and wanting to open my door, to apologize, to fix whatever had broken between us. On the 3rd morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "I'm sorry, I was scared and I took it out on you. Can we try again?" I was downstairs knocking on her door within minutes. "I'm sorry too," I said when she opened it, her eyes red from crying. "I was being careful because I was scared of losing you, but I ended up pushing you away anyway." "We're both idiots," she said, and then she was in my arms, holding me tight like she was afraid I might disappear. "Probably," I agreed. "But we're idiots who are learning how to do this together. Is this what real relationships are like? Fighting and making up and figuring it out as you go?" I think so. I think the difference is that we both want to figure it out. We're both willing to do the work. That fight taught us something important about each other, about the difference between conflict and crisis. We learned that we could disagree without destroying what we'd built, that we could be angry and still love each other, that working through problems together surely made us stronger. Spring came early that year, and with it, new opportunities for both of us. Catherine was commissioned to paint a series of murals for a new development downtown, her biggest project yet. I was offered a partnership in a small design firm that specialized in nonprofit work. Exactly the kind of meaningful projects I'd been dreaming about. It's everything I wanted, I told her as I sat in the courtyard behind our building, watching the first green shoots push through the winter-dead earth. So why am I terrified? Because it matters, she said. Because it's not just a job anymore. It's your dream coming true, and that's scary as hell. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Then you'll learn from it and try again. But you won't fail, Henry. You're ready for this. It was the same conversation we'd had months earlier, but with our roles reversed. I understood now what it meant to have someone believe in you even when you couldn't believe in yourself. What it felt like to have a partner who saw your potential and refused to let you settle for less. What about us? I asked. If I take this job, if your mural career takes off, what happens to what we're building here? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. I think we keep building it, maybe in a different way, maybe with new challenges, but we keep building it, unless you don't want to. I want to, I said quickly. I want to build a life with you, Catherine, whatever that looks like, wherever it takes us. Good, she said, smiling, because I want that too. We talked late into the night about our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future. We talked about the possibility of moving in together, of combining our separate lives into something bigger and more beautiful. We talked about travel and art and the family we might want to create someday. Not as concrete plans, but as possibilities we were brave enough to imagine. I love you, I said as we finally headed inside, the words slipping out before I could second-guess them. She stopped on the stairs, turning to look at me with surprise and something that might have been joy. I love you too, she said, and it was like hearing music for the first time. We kissed there on the stairs in the place where we'd passed each other so many times as strangers, where we'd had our first real conversation, where we'd slowly learned to trust each other with the fragile, precious thing we'd built together. The months that followed were a whirlwind of new beginnings and growing confidence. I thrived in my new position, finally able to combine my design skills with work that felt meaningful. Catherine's murals were featured in a national magazine, and suddenly she had inquiries from cities across the country. We supported each other through the challenges and celebrated each other's successes, learning how to be partners in the truest sense. We moved in together in the fall, combining our books and our dreams and our mismatched furniture into something that felt like home. Kenneth moved into a place across town with his girlfriend, a musician he'd met at one of his gigs, but he remained a constant presence in our lives, the protective brother who'd become a trusted friend. You know, Catherine said one evening as we worked side by side in our shared studio space, she on a canvas and me on a children's book illustration, I used to think that love was supposed to complete you, supposed to fill in all the empty spaces and make you whole. And now I think love is supposed to help you become more yourself, more brave, more creative, more willing to take risks and dream big dreams. I looked up from my drawing at this incredible woman who taught me what it meant to choose courage over fear, connection over safety, growth over stagnation. Is that what this is doing for you? Every day, she said, smiling. What about you? Every day, I echoed, and meant it completely. That night, as we lay in bed talking about our plans for the weekend, for the month, for the year ahead, I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being afraid. Not of everything, not of all the ways life could surprise and challenge us, but of this, of us, of the beautiful, complicated, ever-evolving thing we were building together. Catherine, I said into the darkness, Thank you. For what? For being brave enough to try again, for giving us a chance, for teaching me that love isn't about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone who helps you become the best version of yourself. She turned in my arms, pressing her face against my chest. Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for being patient while I learned how to trust again. We're pretty good at this, I said, running my fingers through her hair. We are, she agreed. We're really, really good at this. A year later, we were planning our wedding, a small ceremony in the courtyard behind our building, where we'd had so many of the conversations that shaped who we became together. Kenneth would officiate, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Frank Lewis, our landlord, had offered to cater, insisting that anyone who'd brought such positive energy to his building deserved the best celebration he could provide. Are you nervous? Catherine asked me the night before the ceremony, as we sat on the front steps where we'd had that first honest conversation about fear and courage and taking chances. About marrying you, not even a little bit, I said. About standing up in front of people and making promises? Terrified. What promises are you going to make? I've been thinking about this for weeks, trying to find words that captured what she meant to me, what I wanted to build with her. I'm going to promise to keep choosing you, I said. Every day, in big ways and small ways, I'm going to promise to keep being honest with you, even when it's hard. I'm going to promise to support your dreams and challenge you to be brave and love you exactly as you are, while encouraging you to keep growing. Those are good promises, she said softly. What about you? What promises are you going to make? The same ones, I think. To keep choosing you, to keep being honest, to keep growing together instead of growing apart. She paused, looking out at the street where we'd built our life together, and to keep believing in the possibility of forever, even when it's scary. Even when it's scary, I agreed. The wedding was perfect in all the ways that mattered, small and intimate and full of people who loved us, who'd watched us find each other and build something beautiful together. Catherine wore a dress she'd found at a vintage shop, simple and elegant and perfectly her. I wore a suit Kenneth had helped me pick out, dark blue instead of traditional black, because Catherine said it brought out my eyes. We wrote our own vows, standing there in front of everyone we loved and promising to keep choosing each other, keep growing together, keep building something worth fighting for. There were tears and laughter in a moment when Kenneth had to stop talking because he was too emotional to continue. You may now kiss your wife, he finally managed to say, and I did, long and sweet and full of promise. The reception was in the same courtyard, strung with lights and filled with music and the kind of joy that comes from watching two people who found their way to each other against all odds. We danced to a song Kenneth had written for us, something about finding home in another person, about love that grows stronger instead of fading with time. No regrets, Catherine whispered as we swayed together under the stars. Only one, I said, and she pulled back to look at me with concern. What's that? That it took us so long to get here. She laughed, bright and joyous. We got here exactly when we were supposed to. We both had to become the people we needed to be first. You're right, I said, spinning her around until she laughed again. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. 2 years later, we bought a house with a big backyard and a studio space where we could both work. Catherine's mural business had grown into something bigger than either of us had imagined, and she was traveling regularly for commissions, while I held down the home base and worked on increasingly ambitious design projects. We'd learned how to support each other's individual dreams while building something together, how to be apart without growing distant, how to come back together stronger than when we'd left. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd never met? Catherine asked one evening as we worked in the garden we'd planted together, something that was part practical vegetables and part artistic expression. Sometimes, I said, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants, I think I would have kept playing it safe, kept choosing the practical option over the thing I actually wanted. I think I would have been fine, but not happy. Not really. I think I would have kept running, she said, from place to place, from opportunity to opportunity, always afraid that staying still meant getting hurt again. And now, she looked around at the garden, at the house, at the life we'd built together with patience and courage and a willingness to keep choosing each other even when it was hard. Now, I know the difference between being stuck and being rooted. between settling and choosing to build something that lasts. That night, as we sat on our back porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Catherine turned to me with that expression she got when she was thinking about something important. Henry, yeah? I want to have a baby. The words hung in the air between us, full of possibility and promise, and a future we'd only talked about in hypotheticals before. Are you sure? I asked, though my heart was already racing with excitement. I'm sure. I want to create something with you that's bigger than both of us. I want to raise a child who knows what it looks like when two people really love each other, really choose each other every day. I want that too, I said, reaching for her hand. I want all of it, with you. 9 months later, we welcomed our daughter into the world, a perfect little person who had Catherine's green eyes and my stubborn chin, and a personality that was entirely her own. We named her Hope, partly for the way she represented everything we dreamed of building together, and partly because hope was what had brought us together in the first place. Parenthood changed us in ways we couldn't have anticipated, made us more patient and more fierce, more tired and more grateful. We learned how to love each other through sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, how to support each other when we were both running on empty, how to find moments of connection even when we were too exhausted to form complete sentences. Look at her, Catherine whispered one night as we stood over Hope's crib, watching our daughter sleep with that perfect peace that only babies seem to possess. She's incredible, I whispered back. We made her. Together. We made this perfect little person who's going to grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she's wanted, knowing that her parents chose each other and chose her. She's going to be so loved, I said, wrapping my arms around Catherine from behind. By us, by Kenneth, by everyone who meets her. She's going to be brave, Catherine said, braver than either of us were. She's going to know that love is worth the risk, that building something with someone is worth the work it takes. She's going to change the world, I said, only half joking. She already has, Catherine said, leaning back against me. She's already changed ours. As Hope grew from baby to toddler to little girl, she became the center of our universe, without becoming the only thing in it. We learned how to be parents while still being partners, how to nurture her growth while continuing to nurture our own relationship. We took family trips to see Catherine's murals in other cities, taught Hope to appreciate art and nature and the beauty that existed in everyday moments. Mama, why do you paint pictures on walls? Hope asked one day as we watched Catherine work on a mural for the local library, something whimsical and colorful that would inspire children to love reading. Because walls are like blank pages, Catherine explained, crouching down to Hope's level. And I like to fill them with stories and dreams and beautiful things that make people happy. Can I paint on walls too? Someday, if that's what you want to do. But first you have to practice on paper and canvas, learn how to use colors and brushes and all the tools that help you tell your story. Will you teach me? I'll teach you everything I know, Catherine promised. And I felt my heart swell with love for both of them, for the way Catherine was already nurturing Hope's creativity while teaching her the value of hard work and dedication. That evening, as we tucked Hope into bed, she looked up at us with those serious green eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. Daddy, do you love Mama? I do, I said. Very much. How much? I looked over at Catherine, who was smiling at the question. More than all the stars in the sky, more than all the words in all the books, more than anything in the whole world, except for you. And Mama loves you too? She does, Catherine said, reaching over to smooth Hope's hair. We love each other, and we love you, and we're going to keep loving each other and you for your whole life. Good, Hope said with satisfaction, as if she'd been checking to make sure the foundation of her world was solid. That's how families are supposed to be. After we'd kissed her goodnight and turned off the lights, Catherine and I stood in the hallway holding hands, both of us a little overwhelmed by the simple profundity of our daughter's understanding. She gets it, Catherine said quietly. She understands that love is a choice, that families are built on people deciding to care for each other. She's going to be incredible, but I said, look what she's already learned just from watching us. We're doing okay, aren't we, Teen? Catherine asked it. And I heard the echo of the insecurity that had once made her so afraid to trust, so afraid to build something lasting. We're doing better than okay, I said, pulling her close. We're doing exactly what we promised we'd do. We're choosing each other every day. We're building something beautiful together. 5 years after Hope was born, Catherine surprised me with news that we were expecting again. This time it was a boy who we named Gabriel after the angel of hope and new beginnings. Hope was thrilled to be a big sister, immediately taking on the role of protector and teacher with a seriousness that made us both laugh and cry. Baby Gabe doesn't know how to do anything, she informed us solemnly. I have to teach him everything. And she did, in her own way. She sang to him when he cried, brought him her favorite stuffed animals when he was fussy, insisted on helping with every diaper change and feeding. She was patient and gentle and fiercely protective, already showing signs of the kind of person she was going to become. She's going to be an amazing big sister, Catherine said one evening as we watched Hope read to Gabriel, her voice serious and careful as she showed him the pictures in her favorite book. She's going to be an amazing person, I said. They both are. We're really doing this, aren't we? Building a family, creating these little people who are going to go out into the world and hopefully make it a little better. We really are, I said, still sometimes amazed by the life we'd built together, by how far we'd come from those early days of careful distance and guarded hearts. As our children grew, Catherine and I grew too, individually and together. She expanded her mural business into teaching workshops, sharing her techniques and vision with other artists. I started my own design firm, focusing on projects that aligned with my values and allowed me to mentor young designers the way I wish someone had mentored me. We learned how to navigate the challenges that came with success, with busy schedules, with the constant balancing act of career and family. We learned how to make time for each other even when it felt like there wasn't enough time for anything, how to keep choosing each other even when choosing was harder than it had been in the beginning. Do you ever miss it? Catherine asked one night after a particularly long day, when we'd finally gotten both kids to bed and collapsed on the couch together. The simplicity of how things used to be, when it was just us. I considered the question seriously, thinking about those early days when our biggest challenge was figuring out how to trust each other, when we had all the time in the world for long conversations and spontaneous adventures. Sometimes, I said honestly, I miss being able to talk for hours without interruption. I miss spontaneous date nights and sleeping in on weekends. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. This is messier and more complicated, but it's also richer, more meaningful. We're not just building a life together anymore, we're building a legacy. Hope and Gabriel? Hope and Gabriel, but also everything else. The way you've changed how people see public art, the way I've helped nonprofits tell their stories, the way we've shown each other and our kids what it looks like when two people really commit to building something together. Catherine curled up against my side, fitting perfectly in the space she'd claimed years ago. I love our legacy. Me too. 10 years after our wedding, we renewed our vows in the same courtyard where we'd first promised to choose each other. Hope was 8, Gabriel was 3, and they both participated in the ceremony, Hope as our ring bearer and Gabriel as the official flower thrower, a role he took very seriously. Why are you getting married again? Hope had asked when we told her about the renewal ceremony. Because sometimes it's good to remind each other of the promises we made, Catherine explained, and because we want to celebrate how far we've come together. Are you going to make the same promises? Some of them, I said, but we've learned new things about love and marriage and being a family, so we might make some new promises too. Like what? Catherine and I looked at each other, both of us thinking about the vows we'd been working on, the promises that reflected not just who we'd been when we first married, but who we'd become together. Like promising to keep growing together instead of growing apart, Catherine said. Like promising to show you and Gabriel what it looks like when people love each other well. Like promising to keep being brave together, I added, to keep taking chances and building dreams and supporting each other through whatever comes next. The ceremony was beautiful, intimate, and meaningful in a completely different way than our wedding had been. Instead of promising to build something together, we were celebrating what we'd already built and promising to keep nurturing it, keep choosing it, keep believing in its power to sustain us through whatever challenges lay ahead. 10 years ago, we stood in the same place and promised to choose each other, I said in my vows. Today, I want to promise to keep choosing you, but also to keep choosing us. To keep choosing this family we've built, this life we've created, this legacy we're leaving for our children. 10 years ago, I was afraid that love meant losing myself, Catherine said in hers. Today, I know that real love means finding yourself, becoming yourself, growing into the person you were always meant to be. You've helped me become that person, Henry, and I promise to keep helping you become yours. After the ceremony, as we danced to the same song Kenneth had written for our wedding, Hope tugged on my jacket. Daddy, are you and Mama going to keep being married forever? That's the plan, sweetheart. Good, she said with satisfaction, because I like our family the way it is. Me too, I said, looking around at all the people who'd come to celebrate with us. At Catherine glowing in the same vintage dress she'd worn to our wedding, at Gabriel chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. I like our family exactly the way it is. But families, like love, are living things that keep growing and changing. 2 years later, we got a call that would test everything we thought we knew about our capacity for love and commitment. Kenneth had been in a car accident. He was going to be okay, but his recovery would be long and difficult, and his girlfriend had left him, unable to handle the uncertainty and the changed circumstances. He needed help, needed family, needed people who wouldn't abandon him when things got hard. Of course he's coming here, Catherine said without hesitation when we got the call. He's family. This is what family does. We converted my home office into a bedroom, rearranged our schedules to accommodate physical therapy appointments and doctor visits, learned how to be caregivers while still being parents and partners and professionals. It was hard, harder than anything we'd faced together, but it also reminded us of what we'd built our relationship on, the willingness to show up for each other, to choose each other even when choosing was difficult. I don't know how to thank you, Kenneth said one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching Hope and Gabriel play in the yard while Catherine painted at her easel nearby. You don't need to thank us, I said. This is what you do for family. Is it weird having me here, disrupting your perfect little life? I thought about the question, about how our routines had changed, how we'd had to learn new ways of being together, new ways of supporting each other through stress and uncertainty. It's not weird, I said finally. It's just different. And different isn't bad. It's just another way of growing. Catherine's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, I said, watching my wife as she lost herself in her painting, as she created beauty even in the midst of chaos and stress and uncertainty. And she taught me what it means to be brave, what it means to build something worth fighting for. You both did that, Kenneth said. You both chose to be brave together. 6 months later, Kenneth had recovered enough to move back to his own place, but something had changed in all of us during his stay. We'd learned that love wasn't just about the easy moments, the romantic dinners and quiet conversations and shared dreams. It was also about showing up when things were hard, about expanding your definition of family, about finding ways to care for each other that went beyond what you'd originally signed up for. We're different now, Catherine said the night after Kenneth moved out, as we lay in bed listening to the house settle around us. Different how? Stronger, I think. More sure of what we're building together. We've been tested in ways we never expected, and we came through it together. Are you glad he stayed with us? I'm glad we were able to be there for him. I'm glad our kids got to see what it looks like when family takes care of family. I'm glad we learned that we can handle more than we thought we could. What do you think comes next? I asked, and it was the same question we'd been asking each other for years. The question that had guided us through every major decision and transition. I don't know, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. But I know we'll figure it out together. We always do. 15 years after that first conversation on the front steps, 20 years after we'd first met struggling with that canvas, we were sitting in the same courtyard where we'd been married, where we'd renewed our vows, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments that had somehow become extraordinary. Hope was 13 now, already showing signs of the artist she was becoming, already demonstrating the kind of courage and compassion we tried to model for her. Gabriel was 8, curious and kind, and full of the same protective instincts toward his sister that Kenneth had always shown toward Catherine. Do you think they'll be okay? Catherine asked, watching our children as they worked together on a mural they were painting on the garden shed, Hope patiently teaching Gabriel techniques she'd learned from her mother. They'll be better than okay, I said. Look at them. They already know what it looks like when people love each other well, when people choose each other consistently, when people build something beautiful together. They're going to face challenges we can't protect them from. They are, but they're also going to face them with everything we've taught them about courage and love and the importance of not giving up on the people who matter. Catherine leaned against my shoulder, and I marveled again at how perfectly she fit there. How after all these years, she still felt like coming home. No regrets? She asked, echoing the question she'd asked on our wedding night. None, I said, and meant it completely. Not one single regret. Not even about the time I made you drive 6 hours to see that terrible art installation because I thought it might inspire me. Especially not that. That was the trip where you came up with the idea for the Children's Hospital mural series. Not even about the time I convinced you to adopt that stray cat even though you were allergic. Mr. Whiskers was a good cat, and my allergies weren't that bad. Not even about all the times I've been scared, all the times I've pulled back when things got intense. I turned to look at her, this incredible woman who taught me what it meant to choose love over fear, growth over stagnation, courage over safety. Especially not those times, I said. Those times taught us both that love isn't about never being scared. It's about being scared and choosing each other anyway. It's about working through the fear together instead of letting it drive you apart. I love you, Henry Kim. I love you too, Catherine Kim. We sat there as the sun set behind us, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me of the first painting of hers I'd ever seen, the one that had made my chest ache with recognition of something beautiful and true. Our children's laughter drifted across the yard, mixed with the sound of evening birds and distant traffic and all the ordinary sounds of a life well lived. What do you think comes next? Catherine asked, the question that had become our tradition, our way of acknowledging that we were still growing, still becoming, still building something together. I don't know, I said, reaching for her hand and threading our fingers together the way I had that first night we had decided to be brave together. But I know it's going to be good. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, and that makes everything possible. Together, she agreed, and in that single word was everything we'd learned about love and commitment and the courage it takes to build a life with another person. Together was our promise, our foundation, our hope for everything still to come. As darkness settled around us and the first stars appeared overhead, I thought about that night months ago when she'd blocked my path in the hallway, when she'd looked at me with those green eyes and said I wasn't leaving until we talked. I thought about how terrified we'd both been, how uncertain, how convinced that taking a chance on each other was the biggest risk either of us had ever taken. Now I knew the truth. Not taking that chance would have been the biggest risk of all. Not talking, not being honest, not choosing to be brave together would have cost us everything we'd built, everything we'd become, everything we still had yet to discover about ourselves and each other, and the beautiful, complicated, ever-evolving thing called love. Thank you, I said into the darkness. For what? For blocking the doorway, for not letting me leave, for insisting that we talk. Thank you for staying, she said, for being brave enough to stay and see what we could build together. Always, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. I'll always stay. I'll always choose you. I'll always choose us. Always, she echoed. And in that promise was everything. Our past, our present, and all the beautiful unknown possibilities of our future stretching out ahead of us like a blank canvas, waiting for us to fill it with the colors of our shared dreams.